Kia ora, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. We are going to wait for people to jump onto the link and then we will get started. I was just chatting to Bernie, who is kind of backstage. She's going to be fielding through some of your questions that will come in about different things, whether that's to do with the webinar recording, all of that good stuff. But yes, I was chatting to Bernie, talking about lack of sleep, but also how is everyone adjusting to the time change that's happened? It's not going easy for me. I don't know why. Today I woke up at 4. I don't normally wake up at 5, so it makes no sense. But yeah, no, it's been a bit of an adjustment. So I'm wondering, how are all of you guys doing with the time difference? Has it been going okay? Has it been difficult? Is it a bit slow start this week after Sunday? Let me know. Excited though, I'm sure everyone is, for Easter break, if you are getting some time off, as well as Anzac, which will be nice. So hopefully you have some fun things planned. The weather's not been too great out in the Manawatu region, which has not been so good. But hopefully things clear up and we do have brighter and sunnier days. So yeah, let me know how everyone's doing. We've had some interesting kind of movements this week. I'll chat to you guys while everyone's jumping on. I'll give it another minute or so. In the last week, we've seen a lot of announcements about health and safety and the health and safety reform, which will be really, really interesting to see how that all plays out. A lot of changes coming in for small businesses. Seems like there's not going to be so much compliance heavy focus for small businesses, which will be a great and welcome change, I'm sure, for a lot of employers out there. But then it also begs the question of what these changes are going to look like, how they're going to be used in practice. And I believe there will be a draft bill coming out towards the end of the year. But let's watch the space, see what happens. And we should probably look at getting things kicked off soon. I see that there's a decent amount of you online. I can see somebody popped into the Q&A. Thank you, saying that they woke up at 5 a.m. the last 2 mornings exhausted. Also, recovering from a concussion is not ideal. Absolutely. I hope that your recovery time is going well and that you're feeling better. I get it. I am also all over the place with the clock. So let's get things started soon. I can see we've still got people trickling on, but this is a jam-packed webinar because we are talking about terminations. It is a topic I've been wanting to do for a very long time with Employment Hero, and Bernie said, let's do it. And I might have sneakily mentioned this in the last webinar that we did. So kia ora, everyone. My name is Sanam. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. We are going to be talking about managing poor performance, and not just poor performance, but taking it that extra step further and actually talking about terminations. Now, this is part 1 of a part 2 series that we've got going on. The second one will be all on conduct, which is awesome. So stay tuned for more information about that, and we will send out more information later on. For everyone wondering who I am, what's going on, and why I am speaking to you, my name is Sanam, and I am the Employment Counsel here at Employment Hero. I have been doing employment law through and through for about 8 years. I've represented employers, employees, everyone across the board. And what I've realized is that compliance is something that we get wrong time and time again, but there are ways to get it right. And it is these kinds of trainings and these understandings that you can have in the workplace to help you manage your compliance. So we'll kick things off and we'll take a look and go through a little bit more about kind of performance and where things are going to lie. Before we get fully into it, I just wanted to say that we have allocated time at the end for Q&A. So make sure that you type all of your questions and things into the Q&A box. For somebody that just asked, will this be recorded? Absolutely. We've got this recorded, and we will be sending out the recording as well as some really good post-webinar content and materials that Bernie is working with our team on. And so we will be sending that out after the webinar. So keep an eye out for this week, and we'll definitely have that out to you guys. So what I'll do is I'll kick things off. I just want to make sure that we've got these a little bit out of order, but I'll start off with just the disclaimer. This is all provided to you in good faith, so please don't hold me to anything. If you guys have any questions, I will have somebody on later on. Her name is Tracy. She will be talking about our HR advisory service. So if you're interested in that and you need some legal guidance and advice and information, then that might be your answer to all of the questions that you have. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And before we kick things off, let's talk about what we're going to cover. So I know it seems very condensed, but I promise you there will be a lot of talking that I will do. So sit back, relax, make sure that you've got a drink in hand, whether it's something a little bit more stiffer or it's just a coffee or a tea, and we'll get things underway. Talking about performance and misconduct first, I really want to talk about the difference there, looking at performance management as an entire process and what that looks like, all the way through to looking at performance terminations and just common mistakes that I've seen time and time again. Like I said, I've been at this, hammering at this for ages now. I run a podcast now on employment law as well. And I know that these are still pain points for employers. They still find this difficult. So I thought, why not impart some knowledge, share some wisdom along the way? So, kicking things off, performance and misconduct. It's an interesting one because I think a lot of times what we do is we might go across the ditch and look at what Australia does and say, hey, let's adopt these principles and these practices. But the reality is that it's a very different landscape. When you're looking at performance, then there are very particular subsets here that you're talking about versus with misconduct, which is more behavioral related. So let me get out into the nitty gritty. Performance, when we're talking about somebody being poor in their performance, we're talking about an employee failing to meet the required standards and expectations of their role. So that is very, very different to something that is behavioral. And when I mean behavioral, I mean actions that an employee does which might be unacceptable in the workplace. So it's about their conduct, it's about their behavior, what they're doing. Whereas with performance, if you're looking at standards, then you're probably going to turn to the job description. You're going to have a look at that first and go line by line and say, these are the skills that they were meant to have. However, they're not really meeting that. And then these were maybe in particular certain experience levels that they needed to bring to the job, and they're not necessarily meeting that either. And that's where you would look at performance. When it comes to conduct, it might be things like theft, coming in late, not following management instruction. And when you look at performance examples, you're looking at missing deadlines, inconsistencies with their work. Maybe they're not crossing every T and dotting every I, and attention to detail is a major component. Maybe repeated work errors there and failing to meet KPIs. These are generally the common ones that we see. So my top tip here to begin and to kick off the topic is to make sure that you don't confuse performance with behavioral issues. Two separate processes. So if you've got theft, lateness, not following instructions, that sits as a disciplinary process, and that would be your conduct. But if you've got somebody that's just not reaching that standard that you had set out, that you had envisaged for that role, then that means that you are looking at performance there. And then you're in the right place. And the performance management is what we need to be looking at. So with that, I wanted to kick things off and have a look at the performance management process, really understanding what you need to have a look at in terms of kicking things off all the way through the end. Now, the way I thought I would do this, and I hope you all like this very, very much. And I saw somebody comment that the video box is overlaying. So hopefully with the recording and the slides, when you get them, then it won't be too bad. So I apologize for that. But what I wanted to kick things off with the performance management process was looking at the process step by step. And I also wanted to tie in some common mistakes and pitfalls and just some things I've seen along the way. So even though this won't go too, in depth in terms of every single thing line by line that you need for the process, it will actually tell you kind of where people go wrong along the way. And then we'll have more of that when we get to the termination component as well. So let's kick things off, shall we? So let's have a look at the formal approach. Before we even get there, though, there's one thing that I want to say to everyone. Always start with the informal process or the informal route first. You might be wondering why. Well, one of the biggest issues I see when it comes to performance management is that an employee will say, hey, look, this is completely out of the blue. I had no idea that this was going to come up. I had no idea that you even had an issue with my performance. And that's because no one's raised it with them. It's usually because no one bothers to pull them aside and say that these are the problems. And it's not because people want to choose to ignore it. They don't want to actually approach the situation. It's because it's difficult. It's hard to have a conversation with somebody and tell them that their performance is not up to par. It's hard for somebody to hear that feedback from someone else. And so that's why I notice quite often that conversation doesn't kick off. But I tell you what, If you go down the informal route, it will make your whole process, your formal approach, a lot easier and a lot more streamlined. It will also ensure that your termination, if you ever have to get to that stage, has been kicked off correctly and it started in the right place. And the best way to make sure that you are entering into this with the right conversations and everything is to check your job descriptions. Your job description that you've given to this employee at the time of hiring them, well, hopefully, you have provided it to them and you've given them the details that are required. All of that would be critical to making sure that the employee is aware of the requirements of their role, the expectations, everything that they need to know about the skill set, the experience, all of that. If that hasn't been provided to the employee, now the employee is in the dark. They don't know what they're meant to be doing. So it's always good to have one in place, and it's always good to leverage off of that when you look at having discussions around performance, because there can't be any two ways about it. The employee has been told this is what's required of them, the employee has accepted that, and now you kind of move along with the process from there. I apologize if my eyes are darting around. I've got the messages popping up, and then I've also got some notes on the side. So just bear with me. But when you've looked at all of that and you've had a consideration about the job description and you've looked at the informal process, let's say now you've gone, hey, look, we've got to kick things off. Unfortunately, this person is just not meeting the requirements that they're meant to meet. We've got to have a real conversation with this person now and start a formal process. So let's have a look at how that would kick off. The first thing that you would do is make sure that you set up a draft performance improvement plan. Now, I'm going to call it a PIP because performance improvement plan is long-winded. I'm going to have to keep saying it. But basically what this is it's usually a table format that you will provide it in. We have examples and things as well. And also our lovely HR advisory team has templates and things that you can use if you wanted to tap into the service. And usually it will come in a table format and it's a formal document that's used. That PIP is a formal document that outlines the employee's performance concerns, deficiencies, where they might not be meeting the requirements that they need to meet. And what you would do in that PIP document and in that table is basically set out a plan to help them improve with specific goals and also timelines and ways that you will provide them support. So that document, once you provide that in a draft form to the employee with a meeting invite, you are basically saying to the employee, hey, look, these are some areas that we're really concerned about. Normally, I would list them out broadly in the letter and then go into something a little bit more detailed because you've got that plan. And with that plan, it should really be something that clearly lays out the concerns. And we'll get into something called SMART goals a bit later, but that is usually the rule of thumb that's used to be able to show what the specific goals are that are trying to be reached, the time period, whether they're measurable, all of those things. But we'll have a chat about that a bit later. So this is usually where it really forms the foundation. I would say a couple of things that people forget. Don't forget to mention where this process might go. You don't have to say definitively that this is going to end with a written warning or wherever you are in whichever stage of the process. Maybe you're looking at termination. You don't have to definitively say that that's what the outcome is going to be, but you do need to show and hint to where this may go as an action or a sanction. You would never want to be in a situation yourself without knowing kind of where your employment is going or what's happening out of this process. And uncertainty, I've noticed, usually causes a lot more concern for the employee. They get their back up, they get very worried. So this will alleviate a lot of that. Now, when you go ahead and send that invite out to the employee, normally I would suggest give them at least a couple of business days to have a look, seek advice if they need to. Try not to do it on a weekend. It's not always ideal because those questions will pop up. They might want to bring a support person or a representative. So it's better to just give them that little bit of extra time so that they can do that and to do it on a weekday. Now, what happens when you invite them to the meeting is all you're going to do is lay out the concerns again that you've got, just briefly have a chat about it. No need to hammer it in. They already have the PIP document there. And once you have a chat to them, you'd go ahead and explain basically, that this is a particular situation, and then you just open the floor for the employee. It's just for the employee to give their feedback, to provide some information about their perspective on the situation. What I see here Sometimes employers, sometimes managers get a bit combative or get defensive. Try not to do that. The whole point of this is for you to just sit back and listen, hear out the employee, see what they have to say, and then it's best to just go from there and see what what the employee comes back with. If they say that they haven't been supported or provided training, you might have to kind of take a sidestep and have a look at providing them all of that before you can really kick off the process. So there's a lot of variables that can come into play, but it's really important to hear that out from the employee first. So once you've had that chat with the employee, let's say they've provided their feedback. This is going to seem like the most simplest process because we're going to not throw 100 different variables in here. But the next stage would be if you believe that the employee, has kind of accepted that PIP and that they've maybe given their 2 cents. But at the end of the day, the reality is that they are still underperforming, and that's why you're wanting to go through this process. Then you would go on to step 3, and that would be implementing the PIP. So putting something in writing to confirm that, one, this is the PIP, this is what it's going to look like, and that it will go ahead, and also what the next few weeks or the next month or whatever it is will look like, because you need to make sure that the employee understands how long they're going to be on this PIP for, and then they also need to understand what the next steps are going to look like for them. And many employers ask me, how long? How long should this go on for? How long should I review them? There is no hard or fast rule. It solely depends on the job, your industry, and how the whole role functions. So I'll give you an example. If you have somebody that's in sales and they need to work towards end of month and they need to meet certain KPIs, it would be pretty unreasonable to put them on like a 2-week PIP and review them only for 2 weeks, when ideally and realistically, you would find out whether they would be a high performer, underperforming, whatever it is, towards the end of the month, because then that's when they would be able to finally close off and either meet their KPIs or not meet their KPIs, right? And then when you look at somebody like a chef, for example, in those situations, maybe 2 to 3 weeks would be reasonable, because you could ideally focus on looking at different, aspects of how they're preparing the dishes, if they're meeting the deadlines for sending the dishes out. I say deadlines, that's not how the hospitality industry works, but you know what I mean. So but basically, it would be testing out and seeing if that would be a reasonable amount of time for that particular person. So those would be the best ways to go about it. And like I said, no hard or fast rule. It's whatever, and unfortunately, this is the test. It is whatever a fair and reasonable employer would do in the circumstances. So if you ever feel a bit icky, feel like maybe this isn't the best idea, then have a think about it, step back and really see if this would be the appropriate way to do it. And if all else fails, then seek some advice along the way. Now, when you're looking at putting the employee and implementing the PIP, now you're going to go through what I just said about a review period. So that could be that 3 weeks, it could be a month, whatever you've set. During that time, this is where a lot of managers and employers fall short, and it's because the hard work you feel has been done. You've had the meeting, the difficult conversations, you've sat down with the employee, but now you have to just monitor them. A lot of times what happens is those one-to-ones and those regular catch-ups and those regular meetings to actually give feedback about performance are never set in place. And that means that the employee ends up turning around and saying that, look, I wasn't actually supported during this time. I wasn't provided any further information. I didn't get any feedback. So it's best to make sure that you don't have that come up at all. And the best way to make sure that you mitigate that kind of risk is to set up regular meetings with the employee, provide them as much support as you can so that they can't use that as a reason for why they might be underperforming. And as you progress through and you finish this off and you kind of come to the end of your review period, you're going to sit back and have a look and see, hey, how did this go? Once we assess this person, did they actually perform well? Did their performance increase, or is it still below, the standards that were required? And maybe they did well in some things and not in other things. So how does that all work in the mix of this? So once you've had a look at everything and you've said, hey, maybe this person actually did great, they've passed, then that's great. You can just go through and finalize that off in writing and say that, this is not going to lead to any warnings, any kind of disciplinary action, anything like that. You won't be put on a further PIP. But Like I said, we're not going to do any other variables. We'll just go through a standard process. And let's say that you realize, okay, we actually do need to put this person on another PIP, and their performance is really not doing that great. Well, if that's the case, now we're moving into a realm that's it's a bit of a hot debate online. I've spoken to a couple of people. I spoke to somebody last week and they said, look, disciplinary is not what I thought happens in a performance process. And the reality is it's not really a disciplinary process, but somewhere along the way, once you get to the step 5, the performance management process kind of morphs into a disciplinary, because what you're doing is you're ending the process potentially, if that's what you choose, with a written warning. And that is kind of a disciplinary action. It doesn't really come under performance. And so that's where somewhat halfway through the process kind of changes. And so, like I said, you might choose to do a written warning, but the top tip that I wanted to say here is that you don't need to always issue a written warning. There could be a scenario where maybe the employee has majority done pretty well and there's only a couple of areas for improvement, and you think that no written warning is needed. So there are so many different scenarios that can come up. Maybe some things in the feedback have come up which have rejigged the PIP or something like that. So it's really important to make sure that you're kind of taking this case by case, and each step you're reassessing the process. And actually, if I could say one thing, that is something that I would really hammer in about for New Zealand. Never assume that the process is always going to go to plan. Make sure you reassess at each stage and go back and revisit. And some of the questions and things that I'm going to ask to kind of get you thinking, those are the things that you probably might want to think about at each stage of the process. So back to this. With step 5, you will end up reviewing the PIP again with the employee. So that means inviting the employee to a meeting, basically discussing your preliminary reviews. Here, your preliminary reviews. Basically, here, you're going to sit down with the employee and you're going to go through and detail where their PIP didn't go to plan, if the PIP should continue, whether there is disciplinary action that you're still putting on the table. Like I said, you need to mention this somewhere a little bit earlier. Don't just bring it up at step 5. It needs to be something that's come up as part of this process. So make sure that you've kind of carried the message through, and make sure that the employee understands that this is a potential outcome still, and this is what you're proposing. It's all proposed at this stage, and it's all put to the employee in a way where the employee is still open to provide their feedback. And during step 5, I would say that it's really important that before you've even reached the stage, when you're looking at assessing that PIP that was done, that you've got comments in there from the manager about maybe areas that the employee isn't doing well in anymore, maybe areas that they weren't doing well in, but then they've improved in, so that it shows that it's a living document and that it has the feedback and the comments in there. And from there, when you meet with the employee in step 6, it's still the same thing. You're getting their feedback, and you're just hearing what the employee has to say and what the employee's views are, as well as getting their feedback on that disciplinary action. So the last few components, or the couple of components of this process, is that step 7 would be, I would say, confirming the outcome. You make a final decision, you put it in writing, you make sure that you attach the copy of the finalized PIP that you're putting in place to say, hey, sorry, but we're going through this process again, and this is what it's going to look like moving forward. And you might have to redo a bit of the PIP here and there, and I would always recommend not to copy and paste. Definitely don't go ahead and copy and paste exactly what you've got. Make sure that you've looked at it. It's a living document that you've gone through, and you've picked at areas where they might have improved, because you don't want to send them through another PIP on something that they've actually done well in, right? And from there, you would again reach the end of that process, and you would follow the same process using step 4. So when I look at step 4, like I said, that is when you go through your review period again. So when you get to the end and you've issued out that PIP and you've done all of that, then that is when you repeat from step 4 again. So it is one of those difficult processes where you're going to have to do this a few times, and you're going to have to keep doing it until you feel that either the employee is maybe performing and there was just a few things that they needed to get better, or if they're not getting better, then and maybe we need to have a look at terminating this employee and making sure that you've got all your ducks in a row for that. So as we kind of progress and we go through, I wanted to make sure that you understood some common mistakes that would come up, because that's the whole purpose behind this. This is something that I really wanted to talk about, because I know that these are the things that nobody really chats about. They always chat about just the process. So let's have a chat and let's get into actually what happens with performance terminations. So the reality is that most processes that you do in New Zealand and most terminations that you do, they will be two-pronged. Anything from a restructure process and a redundancy all the way through to disciplinary performance, all of that, it will require two prongs. And what that means is that you need to have a good reason to terminate the person. So think about, if we talked about a disciplinary, a good reason for some people might be theft, for example. But then the question is, how do we know that the employee has stolen? Do we have CCTV footage? All of those kinds of things. So the second prong with a lot of these processes and these steps is to look at a fair and proper process. And so what we're looking at here is that you need a good reason, and you also need a fair and proper process for a termination to kind of take place. So what do we mean by fair and proper process? Unfortunately, for New Zealand, we don't actually have anything in legislation. Everything is case law based, and that's what's our guiding star when we have a look at how things should be done. And from cases, we generally know that there is this broad brush that's just applied, which is what would a fair and reasonable employer do in the circumstances? Not easy, right? How do you explain what you would fairly do? Because what I would do would be completely different to what you might do. And that is the difficulty. And that's where employment law becomes very contentious, controversial, and that's why we have cases that go to the authority. So to help alleviate all of this, I came up with some questions that I think would help kind of prompt and maybe get you thinking and might be hopefully thought-provoking. And the ones that I really wanted to focus on were questions that I would say, once you're doing a process, let's say you step back and you're starting to look at the next stage in the process, or maybe you're even up to the stage where you're terminating. I would say get in early. Try to ask yourself these questions much, much earlier on rather than at the termination stage, because nothing else makes me so sad than an employer really feeling like they had, or a manager feeling like they had gone through all of the process that they needed to, that they had ticked all the boxes, that they had considered every variable, but then there are a few bits and pieces here and there that they didn't even consider. And it's not because they chose not to, it's just because it was hard to understand what the process required. And like I said, we just don't have an exact legislative process. So you kind of take bits and pieces from everything. So you may be thinking, okay, Sanam, long-winded, what is the actual questions? Well, I'll flick over to this slide, and then this will kind of touch on some of the points. But the first thing is, I would say, are your expectations reasonable? I know that this may land with a lot of people, and sometimes it might not be very palatable for others. And it's because it may be calling you out a little bit and making you think, look, what I'm setting for this particular employee, is it something that would be reasonable? Just because such and such person does it, am I expecting for this person to do it? If that's the case, then that's where it gets a little bit trickier. But if you apply the same brush across the board and you say, no, that these are the KPIs that are required for everyone in the team, then that makes a lot of sense. But a lot of times with performance, it's easy to kind of look at the situation and go, oh, well, this employee is actually doing great at the X, Y, and Z. So why is this employee not doing good at X, Y, and Z? That they need to be performing at the same level. So it's better to not just try to do tit for tat and match other employees, and try to actually make sure that what you're setting is reasonable. And another question to ask as well would be around, has the employee been fully aware of the issues? Have you given them time to improve? Do they actually understand these are the areas of concern? Because like I mentioned when I was going through the steps, questions that come up time and time again from employers is, what do I do when this employee is saying that this is coming out of the blue? It's hard to do it after the fact, and that's the reality. It's a lot easier if you can let the employee know informally that these are some areas of concern. It doesn't have to be an onerous conversation. Literally just have a chat to them in passing in a one-to-one. Pull them aside, just keep it really casual. Try to make sure that there's not hundreds of people around, kind of looking at them and seeing, how you're pulling them aside or anything like that. When you do that, then that will allow you to kind of branch into this process a little bit more easier, and it will soften the blow. And when you're looking at the whole aspect of providing, this feedback to the employee and all of that, really take a step back and consider and ask yourself, did I actually provide them training? Did I give them the support that's needed? I had somebody recently speak to me about struggling with systems and processes in their workplace. And what they said to me was that I'm finding it really difficult. I've raised this with, the senior management, and the particular manager I've raised it with, they haven't actually responded and tried to provide me with training. And it would be really difficult then for an employer to go down and barrel down a performance management route when at the end of the day, the employee is the one crying out and going, hey, I need some training. Please provide me the training. So if that's the case, then please really genuinely consider that. Have a think about it and see if this is something that you can provide. And it will definitely alleviate a lot of the pushback that you might get as this progresses on in terms of a process. And there is always disagreements that's going to come up when you do a PIP. And it is really important to make sure that you're kind of squashing some of the things. I know that I've spoken to teams and HR practitioners about this quite a lot around what happens when there's a disagreement over certain components of the PIP. The reality is that you might get pushback, and not everyone will see eye to eye, and that's why employment relationship problems start, is that nobody actually agrees and no one's on the same page. Everybody's agreeing to disagree. So if that's the case, then it's really important to try to respond to the employee. You don't have to do it in that meeting. You can do it afterwards. You can do it in the letter when you formalize and finalize the PIP and you're implementing it. But it is important to provide them some sort of feedback so it doesn't seem like you're just leaving them hanging with their concerns. And if there is a disagreement over what's in the PIP and what's required, then it's really important to also ask yourself, is the dispute that's happening, is it reasonable? Do we need to do a further review? Is there things that I have missed here? And a couple of the last questions I would say to really touch on is, have I really given the employee an opportunity to respond? Do they have all of the information that's required? Something we never talk about when we have all of these discussions is that good faith obligations still apply. It's that sprinkle that goes on to everything when you touch, employment law as an employer, as an employee. Good faith is a two-way street, and that means letting the employee know everything about where a process is going in terms of, like I said in the beginning, letting them know this might lead to termination, this might lead to disciplinary action up to and including a warning, for example. All of that needs to be laid out very clearly because they need to be fully aware of where things are going, what the allegations are, where their performance deficiencies are, all of that, so that they have a chance to actually thoroughly respond. If you've ticked all of that off, then you're definitely well on your way to making sure that this is a much safer termination. And the last thing, very, very critical, have you considered all of the mitigating factors? For example, health issues, mental health issues. Maybe there's a disagreement happening in the workplace with a manager. Have you actually peeled that back and looked into it further? Because those are the questions that will ensure that you're doing the right process. I have seen many, many times employers kick off a performance management process. Somewhere along the way, maybe the employee has disclosed that they have mental health concerns, and that is what's affecting their performance. I would say, put a stop to that process and start having a look at medical incapacity if there is room to go down that route, because what's going to happen is it's going to undermine your actual performance management process. There is now a reason outside of just being, not able to perform correctly, there is mitigating factors that will actually influence the performance management process. So you might not need to do it all the time, but it is an area that I'm seeing come up time and time again, even more so than it did maybe about 5, 6 years ago, because now we're in a completely different landscape, right? We're post-COVID, we've got a lot more mental health issues on the rise, and so these are the things that might crop up quite often. So those are the areas that I would say would be, kind of questions and things that you might need to probe and come up with as you're looking at each stage of the process. A few things that I wanted to draw out of what I've got on this slide as well, and hopefully this will really help you. And I hope that this is something that you'll be able to kind of take away. And like I said, Bernie will be sending these out your way, is checking your policies and employment agreements. Make sure that you don't get the process wrong, not based on the steps that we've discussed today, but also based on the fact that maybe your policies have something in there around how the process is meant to be run. Never, never ignore that, because the employee can turn around and say, hey, you were meant to do X, Y, and Z step, and you haven't actually done that. So make sure that you're not going down that path. And like I said in the beginning, we always have a bit of a thing where we draw on Australia's way of doing things. It's not 3 warnings and you're out. I know also the MB document, the Ministry of Business Innovation and Employment document that's online, mentions 3 times doing a performance improvement plan and ending up with a written warning and then looking at termination. It doesn't go that way all the time. And that's because you can have different variables, right? You can have the employee, for the most part, 80% improve and just 20% kind of hanging by, or maybe 90 and 10%, and they still need to improve 10%. Would it be fair to terminate them off the back of that? And would that fair and reasonable employer test really show that you've acted in the right way? That could be questionable in those circumstances. So that's where I would say, just be a bit careful, make sure that you're not applying anything from across the ditch over here. And when it comes to the training, again, I gave you that example. Make sure that you are fully aware that the employee has either received all of their training, that they've been given as much support as possible, and that they are given that support and guidance throughout the PIP process as well. Another one that comes up, and I can't wait to say this, is using outdated examples. Please do not do this. I see it too often. If you've got something that has come up, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, then that's not okay for sure. But if you've got something that's come up a couple of months ago and you're now raising it with the employee, you've let it pass for a very long time. There is no hard or fast rule around how far back you have to go, but try to keep those informal conversations going and then go ahead and launch into something once you see that after having a chat to the employee, maybe in the next week or couple of weeks, they're still not performing, even though you've tried to informally approach it. Once you kind of set that level and that bar, that will make it a lot easier for you to launch into those conversations. Also, bringing up something from ages ago, not a good idea, because then the employee will say, well, that was okay back then, so why is it an issue now? So never let those things slide. It's better for you to just slowly broach it, have the conversation. And last thing, that good faith obligation. Really make sure that you have a look at that. Now, before I pass over to Tracy, I wanted to touch on 2 things about asking yourself. The SMART goals is what I mentioned earlier. I won't leave you hanging. I will go into the SMART goals. Look, basically what this is all about, and the reason why they say you should use this for the PIP, is because it just makes life a lot easier. SMART is the acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Basically, each letter in that suggests how you need to set out that PIP. So the way that you would do it is to set out these objectives and these goals that are something that the employee can actually reach, that's attainable. So if you were doing, something maybe salesy, or you were looking at customer service or something like that, then your particular SMART goal could be to increase sales by 15% between April to June by implementing a new customer outreach strategy and tracking, particular KPIs weekly. And that will allow you to actually break it down and see that it is something very specific that they need to reach. The problem that can come up is that employers will say things like, Sanam, you need to get along with Bethany. And we're going to track that and see if everything goes okay. How do you measure me getting along with Bethany? It's not going to be an easy thing to do. I don't like Bethany. I don't really know Bethany. But yes, so if that comes up, then that is a problem because you can't really measure that. And that's not really time bound, and it's really hard to determine. If you've got strict KPIs in place, then it's a lot easier to check if you can achieve that, if you can measure that. And that's where something that has specific numbers, very specific, ways to reach it, particular timeframes will make life a lot easier. So don't fall into that trap. And just like I mentioned with the hospitality sector, for example, even that can have its own KPIs and deadlines. I mean, producing a dish to the required recipe, the required standard to make sure that the dish goes out in a particular time frame, all of that can be built into your SMART goals as well. And so that is one area that I really wanted to cover. And the last thing, Tracy, I promise I'm almost handing it over to you, is looking at contributing to poor performance. I want to hammer into this one a lot because all it will take is for a manager that might not be getting along with that particular employee, or maybe they are struggling in the workplace. Maybe the business doesn't have a clear, idea of where the employee needs to be meeting certain expectations. Maybe they're moving goalposts and shifting things all over the place. If that's the case, then it will be very hard to performance manage an employee. And that's where I would say, look within the business. Make sure just one more time that there is nothing that's impacting the employee's performance based on what the company is doing. And then that basically will be everything that you really need to have a look at in terms of, have I done the right steps? Have I done the correct process? Have I really checked everything off and gone through step by step everything that I need to do? And making sure that when you've got curly things like the employee taking sick leave in between, that you're putting on that good faith hat, you're putting on that reasonable employer hat, and that you're giving them that extra time in between certain processes, in between certain steps, of the process, and that you're putting things on pause and waiting for them to come back into the workplace. Actually, before I pass on, Tracy, one more thing. That is actually something that comes up quite often, is where an employee will call in sick in the middle of a process. I would say, look at the process, put it on pause. Don't send any comms to the employee while they're on the period of sick leave about the performance management process. I know I've definitely been involved in some personal grievances where I've used that as a little bit of a trump card. So just be careful and make sure that you go down the right path when it comes to that. All right, Tracy, I've hammered enough. I'm going to pass it over to you. And the reason why I'm going to pass it over to Tracy is because she runs our amazing HR advisory service for New Zealand. And that means that you don't have to listen to me. You can actually go to the right person and get the advice and information that you need. So Tracy, take it away. Thanks for coming on board.
Thanks, Sanam, you're amazing. Loved listening to your voice and all the amazing things that you were sharing. Yes, we come across these sorts of issues every single day as part of our service. So the better prepared that you are for dealing with these sorts of things as they come up, the better. But yes, we absolutely have this the service, the HR advisory service for New Zealand. So I head up the team. Essentially, there are sort of 4 key areas that we cover. We've got the biggest one being unlimited workplace advice. So you have access to on-demand support via phone and email from myself and my team. We're all about making it really clear for you, making it easy for you to understand, and just providing advice that's easy that you're able to follow. So we're also really happy to walk each step through a process with you. So it's not just us providing you with an entire email and off you run on your own. You can touch it base with us through each step as you go, and we'll just make sure that you keep on track. We also have a number of policies and guides available. Pretty much whatever you need, we have it. If we don't have it, we create it within the HR sphere. From a compliance perspective, when you first join with the HR advisory service, we do what we call a compliance health check. So we have a number of questions that we get you to run through around a variety of different things, around your policies, around your understanding of good faith, a number of different factors. And then what we do is we essentially provide you with a report which has each of these key areas like a traffic light. So what are you doing really well? What are you not doing so well? And what could you do better? And then those are the sort of things that we can work with you on making sure that you've got the right policies and things in place. And then finally, advocacy. If you follow our advice on these sorts of situations that Sanam's been discussing with you today, from start through to finish, and it all goes still a bit pear-shaped and you end up with a personal grievance, you are entitled to advocacy in the event that we get some sort of claim, personal grievance that comes through. So, and that is up to mediation, having someone to support you through that process. So, yeah, we're really there to walk beside you, I guess, and support you in dealing with these sorts of situations, which we know, working in HR come up a lot. And like Sanam said, there are the tricky bits that come in where people call in sick. People have mental health issues that that make dealing with these situations a lot more difficult. So yeah, we're really there to help support you through that. So yeah, that's pretty much it from me. Back to you.
That is brilliant, Tracy. Thank you so much. Like I said, isn't it great? Covers everything. You've got all the way to like kind of being a little bit mini audit, right, Tracy? That's what they would kind of go through. And then you've got all the way through to the advocacy in the end. I mean, it's a pretty sweet deal, but I'm just saying that. So you guys make your own opinions and your judgments. Now I'll get into the Q&A portion. Tracy, if you want, no pressure. If you want to just jump in and any questions, add in 2 cents, feel free. I don't mind. All the hands will help in this case. Now I'll come in with a few of the questions that kind of came up, and that concludes the presentation component. I don't know if I ever should have mentioned that or not, but the Q&A component, we've got a few questions that came in. Very interesting. A lot of people saying that things about job description, position description that's been signed years ago that gets misplaced. It happens. So many people don't even give a position description or a job description, and that absolutely happens. I have seen it happen time and time again. Tracy, I can see you nodding, and people are saying, how do you measure it from the position description, or do you need to get them to sign a new one? Get them to sign a new one. It's going to be an uphill battle. It's going to be difficult. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. A lot of times when somebody's been doing one job and then all of a sudden now you're bringing up something else, maybe that you envisioned for the role and that you had it all listed out, they might be going, that's not actually what I meant to be doing. And it's going to be a difficult conversation, but it's always better for you to have something signed, documented on their personnel file than trying to performance manage them off the back of something that's old, outdated, misplaced, or that doesn't even exist at all. So hopefully that kind of helps. And like I said, the conversation is not going to be easy. I am no HR specialist, but I know that those conversations are not easy. So definitely, if you need something specific, HR advisory team will be amazing for that. I am an employment lawyer through and through, so I am all about compliance and the law, but they are much better at having the nicer and softer conversations than I am. So when we are looking at performance, another question that came up is, somebody asking that, do you say that to the person before kicking off the PIP what the outcome could be if they don't meet the PIP areas? Yes, like I've hammered in about this, absolutely. I would say that you need to at least, it's just a line, throw it in there to say that, look, a potential outcome of this process may be that you are going to get a written warning, depending on if you're at the final stages and you're looking at termination. Mention that. Don't leave anybody in the dark about where their employment is going, because that will make your process 100 times harder. Trust me, it is not only a good faith obligation, but it also makes the process and the conversation a lot more difficult. So yes, definitely broach it, have the conversation informally, and then when you move into a formal process, just have that line in there that says that, look, this could lead up to and including a first written warning, for example. And when you do the process again, could be a second written warning. However, you want to go depending on what your outcomes are. And somebody has mentioned that, let's say that we've got a 2-week PIP and the final review meeting has already been pre-scheduled and everything like that. Let me just read through. During the meeting, can we say what we're thinking, for example, a warning, or do we need to send a letter in advance before that final meeting? And this is to look at kind of basically, you're checking in to see how they're going at the end of week 1, and then you're looking at your review period. Once you mention it initially, when you send out your draft invites and your draft PIP sorry, you're not your draft invite. Your invite is set in stone. Your PIP is draft. And once you send out your draft PIP, that's where you're going to really have that line and mention it in there. If you're meeting with the employer regularly after that, maybe you've got pre-scheduled meetings, one-to-ones, you don't need to hammer in and you don't need to mention it at every meeting. I feel like it might get a bit daunting, but absolutely mention it when you're, having the discussions, initially. And then from there, again, when you go through the steps of the process and you're back at the review period again, or you're back at doing that disciplinary action stage that I was talking about, or that process, that's where you would mention it again. And oh, well, this is really interesting. We've got a drug related one. I'm going to skip over this because I feel like this is more of a Tracy question, since we've kind of missed the mark on exactly the performance side. But good one for trying to sneak this one in there. But I'm sure Tracy will reach out and be able to help. So the next question that came up is, what would be some ways to manage mitigating factors like mental health concerns, and how could you still improve their performance? Like I said, it is about making sure that you've really stepped back and had a look. If somebody's saying to you, look, I'm having a really hard time in my personal life, and I'm finding things really difficult, maybe something's going on with their partner, or they've got extra responsibilities that they're taking on, have you considered EAP? Have you provided them other forms of assistance that will actually help those mitigating factors and alleviate that, so that you can actually now look at whether performance is a problem, or if it's just their external factors that are impacting them. Same thing goes for if they've got an injury, or if they're feeling really unwell, or if they're sick or anything like that. Have you actually considered the fact that maybe they need a little bit of time off work? Are they burnt out? All of these different things that can contribute to it. I know we speak about burnout heavily, but the signs are there. There's a lot of information, and we definitely have our resources as well. We've done webinars on this. There is definitely telltale signs, and that's where you can make sure that you've addressed those before you barrel into performance. There'll be nothing worse, right, than being told that you're not doing X, Y, and Z, but it's actually all because you've been piled on with too much work, or you're really struggling to stay afloat. So consider all of that. And like I said, it's about providing support, training, EAP, maybe looking at what's happening outside of the workplace as well. Now, somebody did say this, and I had a quick look, and I might have used a little bit of AI to come up with a bit of an answer here, because I thought, what example would we use when you don't have KPIs? And I would get this all the time. I would always, when I worked at the Restaurant Association, dealing with the hospitality sector, chefs don't have KPIs. The barista doesn't. They don't have to make X amount of coffees in a day. But what do we do in that case? Well, we have a look at exactly, like I said earlier, how does it work when you have a dish that needs to be prepared? Have you followed the recipe to the T? Have you actually sourced a lot of chefs and executive chefs, head chefs, they need to source particular products? Have they actually done that? Are they meeting all of those obligations and those expectations? Are they sending out the food on time, or is it sitting on the pass just chilling? So all of those things are aspects that you can build in to your specific PIP, and it doesn't need to just focus on exact KPIs in terms of a percentage or a certain amount of calls that they need to make in a day, things like that. Oh, the questions are just flooding in. All right, so we've got another one where somebody said, what happens if you've got, I really like this acronym, by the way, if you've got a vapid goal, it's pie in the sky, irrelevant, delayed. This was brilliantly done, by the way. Thank you, Anonymous. I really appreciate it. If you've got that kind of scenario, what happens? And if you realize that your PIP actually doesn't have the right SMART goals, it doesn't actually set everything out right, you've done it very much in an ambiguous way, what can you do? Well, there is no harm in you stopping a process and redoing this PIP and realizing that, look, this wasn't the right thing to do. You might have different ways of tackling this. It could be that maybe you actually do need to assess performance again. And because these particular goals that you set out, they weren't actually accurate. Maybe the performance issues haven't actually been honed in on. And so you should take a step back, stop the process, and monitor the employee and go down an informal approach first before you kick off the PIP. Or it could be that you've made a few mistakes here and there, and that you just need to rejig what is said in that entire PIP document, and you just need to go through and have a look at changing a few things. If that's the case, a little bit different. So every scenario will be different, and it is completely fair and reasonable to stop the process and go back. But this person asked if you can change the goal for the second, PIP or the second time. Yes, you can, but make sure that you're quite upfront about what's going on. And I would say that means that when you're looking at terminating the employee, you're not relying on that first PIP for the termination. You make a very clear separation between that. All right. So as we're getting through, I can see somebody did ask if we're doing a similar webinar focusing on misconduct and serious misconduct. Yes, we are. We are doing a terminations one, and we are going to be focusing on conduct and termination. So absolutely keep an eye out for that. Bernie will send out more information. Where are we based? We are based in New Zealand. Very exciting. I'm based in the Manawatu region, if anybody wants to know. All right, and we'll get into some more of the performance questions. Bernie, bear with me. I know we've got 5 more minutes left, but I want to get through as many as we can because I can see we've got about 15. And so what do we have here? So we've got one that is about the best strategy to use when you have an employee that takes a lot of sick leave and provides medical certificates each time. This one, again, I will send this on to Tracy to see if anybody wants to, have a chat to the HR advisory team. Please reach out to HR advisory, see if you want to join up with that service. And there is a question that's come up around under what circumstances can it be appropriate to terminate someone after a PIP as opposed through going through warnings and more PIPs? Never. I would say that there is a very, 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 very like a 0.0000 point whatever 1% chance of it happening. It's just not going to happen. The reality is that if you're going to do a performance process, you will need to do multiple processes to look at terminating. The only time you may be able to do something where it's kind of an on-the-spot dismissal or a summary dismissal or anything like that, it would be a really high threshold. If I can put it in perspective, we're talking about a death in the workplace or something like that, and that falls outside of a performance management process. So I would highly recommend to do each step and each part of the process. And somebody asked that about having the informal chat with the employee and whether there should a support and guidance plan be put in place first before going into a PIP. So yes, so when you have your chat with your employee, your informal discussions, that's just casual discussions that are going to happen back and forth. It's not going to be too onerous. It's just about making sure that the employee is aware that these are the concerns that you have. When you are going to look at putting a PIP in place, then that is when you need to make sure that when you reach out to the employee and send them that invite letter, it very clearly details exactly what your concerns are, how the PIP will be done, what the PIP will entail, because you'll have that table in there. And along with that, that will be your support and guidance plan. And if you want to do something before that in the informal stage, you absolutely can. I know some people, they do kind of like a goal assessment plan. You can absolutely do that, but you just need to really make sure and make it very clear that it is an informal part of this process and that you're not relying on that as a formal PIP or anything to terminate the employee, because it can get a bit confusing in the employee's eyes. Easy for HR to understand, a bit difficult when you're quite removed from the process. All right, Bernie, if you want, drop in the chat if it's okay if I go a couple of minutes over. I'm just going to go through as many questions as I can because I can see them kind of still coming through. So I will answer a few more. And there is somebody that asked a very fair question, actually. Constructive dismissal risk. I actually was speaking to somebody recently. Thank you, Bernie. She said go for gold. So everyone that can hang around, will hang around for a couple more minutes and kind of push this out a little bit. Constructive dismissal risk. What happens if an employee resigns? Well, employees do resign when they get backed into a corner in these particular meetings. It definitely does happen. And there is always a risk for a personal grievance for constructive dismissal. Basically, the employee saying that I had no other option but to resign because I felt like I was going to be terminated or that I just had no other option there. Generally, what you would say is that you want to make sure conservative approach and the more, conservative and lightweight approach is to say to the employee, look, this is just a process. We are just going through this to try to get you back on track. We are not here to look to, terminate you, especially if you're in the first PIP. That's not what you're angling for, hopefully. And you are looking at going through the next stages of the process. So just reminding them of that and saying that no decisions have been made, you want to hear their feedback. That's what will kind of help mitigate that personal grievance risk. Now, I say this, but it is completely up to you. When I worked in advisory, I think the reality is that a lot of advisors will say, hey, look, it's risky, be careful. But the honest truth is it's your business. If you're running a business, you need to make that decision. If you don't want that employee back, then you have to figure out if you want to wear that risk of the constructive dismissal or not. So continuing on with the last few questions, how many people should be in the formal meeting? 2 from the employer, the employee support person. Look, to be honest, just try to keep it a little bit more balanced, or try to keep it looking a lot more for the employee than the employer. I would say best not to have 2 massive decision makers or anything in that meeting. It would be a lot better to just have somebody representing the company that will be a decision maker or carrying through the process. And then also maybe you might want to have a note taker. Nowadays, with all the AI and all of that stuff, you could have a note-taking app or something installed in your computer, and you could use that. I sounded so old there. I promise I know how to use technology. But yes, you might have something like that installed, and then you could use that. And with the employee, it would be the employee and the support person. I wouldn't expect for there to be tons and tons and tons of employees that are, bringing the support persons and then extra people along the way. So try to keep that to about 2. And let's see what else has come up. So let me just have a quick look. Okay, so this is a really good one. And like I said, it comes up time and time again. Previously, this particular person that asked this question went through a PIP process. They were, halfway through. All of a sudden, the employee claimed that they had a disability, and now they're struggling with the role, and that's why they've actually been struggling to perform in their role. What would be the best process here? Change your tact. If the employee is saying that their performance is being impacted by a particular injury, an illness, a disability, then you need to start pivoting and having a look at that. And it could be medical incapacity, but it also could not be. So definitely seek some advice around it. It could be a process where you meet with the employee, find out a little bit more about their health, their well-being, do a medical assessment depending on what's in your employment agreement and if the employee agrees, and seeing how you can make reasonable adjustments for the employee in the workplace, or whether the doctor actually ends up saying, no, this employee is able to do their role to the full capacity. This particular disability doesn't actually impact their ability to do the role. It does come up from time to time. That does happen. Certain things like, I know it's not like it could be a disability in some regions, but things like anxiety, depression, things like that, they could negatively impact an employee in the workplace, or in some cases it might not. It might be a pre-existing condition and work is not being aggravating them. So it can always be different depending on what the doctor says. So hopefully that helps. And we do have some information and some, I guess, templates here and there as well. But like I said, our advisory team has those templates. So if you ever needed anything to the person that asked, please reach out about the advisory service. Otherwise, our resources hub is really great, and our team puts a lot into getting that resources hub really live, up and running. So go ahead and check out all those guides. We'll also be sending you some more information. I'll do the last couple of questions and seeing what people have said. So somebody has asked if you've got mitigating factors are still kind of ongoing, and let's say you've got 6 months that they've been on the PIP, and is a PIP still appropriate after a certain amount of time if there's still no improvement? If you've got mitigating factors like the person that just asked about health and things like that, then most likely this is not the process that you need to go down. It needs to be something else. So I would recommend there to really take a step back and have a consideration about if you're doing the right process. So yes, the PIP might not be the right answer. And Somebody asked how many times you would put an employee through the same or similar PIP. Someone who improves in all areas while the PIP is running, then slowly regresses each time to really poor performance. It happens so often. You might have an employee that smashes goals, and then all of a sudden you've got a PIP in place because you've realized that they're going downhill, and then they might come back up again, and then you'll take them off of the PIP. To be honest, you want to show that there has been an escalation of basically concerns. You want to show that the employee has continued to be inconsistent in their performance. If you're not able to show that, then it's really hard to terminate them. And in terms of the number of how many times you need to put them on, I know I mentioned it's not 3 and you're out. Generally, that you would say you would try to do 3 processes and then start looking at terminating. But your 3 processes have to be ironclad and sound. So make sure that they are proper, good processes. And I'll just do one more question, Bernie, if that's okay. Let's see what else we've got. How long after we sign a new position description before we can do any kind of performance reviews or performance management plans or processes? There is no hard or fast rule. It's whatever you think is reasonable. If the employee didn't do a lot of they didn't push back, they didn't have a lot of issues, then the reality is that we can kind of maybe look in the next couple of weeks of starting a performance improvement plan. But like I said, it also depends on the type of employee that you have. If you've got somebody in sales and they work on month end, wait till month end. Figure out and see after you put that position description or job description in place if they need to go down that path. And then that's when you'll be able to really see if, hey, we've actually looked at their performance, we've assessed them, it's within the right reasonable time frame, and we've gone down that path. All right, Bernie has given me the last one. Let's wrap up. So I am wrapping up, everyone. Thank you so much to everybody that is still hanging around. I can see there's still a lot of you there. I really appreciate you being on this webinar. Thank you for your time and for you taking out time in your day. Hopefully this has been informative and you've gotten what you kind of came here for. And what we are going to do is we are going to send out the recordings, the slides, the materials, as well as other things that we have accompanying this, like guides and fact sheets. With that said, so the person that asked about whether we're going to do one on conduct, absolutely, Bernie and I are. We are back again on the 2nd of July. So that is going to be a Wednesday. Make sure that you register for that one because that is going to be all about conduct related terminations. And we are going to get into the nitty gritty. Now, I forget about this last time, but I'm going to mention it. A survey will pop up. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because I want to know what you think about this particular webinar. If you feel like it was a bit too high level, if it was maybe not in enough detail, or maybe you needed a little bit more, then let us know so that what we can do is make sure that the next one is even more amazing for you. So thank you so much, everybody. Like I said, my name is Sanam. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn if you've got any questions. Reach out about the HR advisory service. We have amazing advisors that are going to be there to help you. Thank you so much, everyone. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your afternoon. And I will see you all hopefully back in July. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.